Beyond the wedding, Princess Leonor and the stability of Spain's crown. Picture the hush of a cathedral just before dawn. Stone walls breathing centuries of memory. A single figure stands beneath the vaults, not yet crowned, not yet married, but already carrying a weight most people never see. In that silence, Spain's monarchy feels exposed, not threatened by scandal or noise, but by expectation. Because every transition, every personal milestone of the heir, is also a national test. Behind the elegance, behind the carefully framed images, Spain's crown is under pressure to prove something essential: continuity. Now imagine the cameras outside, waiting. Headlines ready. Commentators prepared to reduce everything to romance, speculation, or spectacle. Yet inside the institution, the conversation is very different. Quiet, measured, almost austere. Because this moment, beyond the wedding, is not about celebration. It is about whether the crown still holds. And that is why this story matters. Beyond the wedding, Princess Leonor and the stability of Spain's crown. This title is not poetic. It is precise. It describes how a personal future is inseparable from a constitutional role. How one life becomes a rehearsal for institutional endurance. How Spain watches not with excitement alone, but with calculation. Spain's monarchy is not a relic displayed behind glass. It is a living framework embedded within law, history, and national identity. Every gesture by Princess Leonor is interpreted not as expression, but as signal. Not as youth, but as readiness. And here is the first question almost nobody asks aloud: what happens when the cameras stop rolling? Royal weddings, across Europe, have long been misunderstood. They are framed as fairy tales, while insiders know they function more like audits. Moments when the public, the press, and political institutions silently assess stability. Spain is no exception. In fact, Spain's constitutional monarchy makes this scrutiny sharper, not softer. Princess Leonor does not marry as a private citizen. She steps forward as the future embodiment of the state. Her choices, timing, demeanor, all are measured against continuity. Against whether the crown can adapt without breaking its historical spine. This distinction matters more than it appears. Observers outside Spain often forget how directly the monarchy connects to constitutional balance. The crown stands above daily politics, yet within the legal framework that guarantees democratic order. It is a symbol, yes, but also a stabilizer. When trust in institutions wavers, symbolism becomes substance. And so the wedding, hypothetical or future, becomes something else entirely, a signal of readiness. Notice how discussions around Princess Leonor never linger too long on emotion. The language shifts quickly to preparation, discipline, formation, military training, constitutional oaths, public restraint. These are not coincidental narratives. They are rehearsals, visible proof that continuity is being engineered, not assumed. The phrase on the thumbnail isn't decoration, it's the monarchy's hidden tension made visible. Stability of the crown. Stability does not mean immobility. It means controlled transition. And Spain has learned, sometimes painfully, what happens when transitions feel uncertain. But here's the detail almost nobody outside the palace considers: stability is tested most intensely when nothing seems wrong. Look closely at Princess Leonor's public presence. Her posture is deliberate, her expressions restrained, even moments of warmth are measured. Body language here is not personality, it is protocol. A quiet demonstration of discipline under scrutiny. Every appearance reassures without explaining. Media reports frame these moments as ceremonial. But insiders whisper about calibration, about timing, about how visibility is balanced against mystery. Too much exposure weakens authority. Too little breeds distance. The crown must walk that line flawlessly. And yet, behind closed doors, the story takes a sharper turn. Spain's monarchy exists in a modern landscape where legitimacy is no longer inherited unquestioned. It must be renewed, continuously, through relevance, restraint, and credibility. A future wedding becomes one of the most visible tests of that renewal. Will it feel aligned with contemporary Spain? Will it reinforce neutrality? Will it project continuity rather than rupture? Every detail matters. Even the smallest deviation from protocol can trigger speculation about institutional confidence. Even silence can speak. Few realize how this subtle choreography ties directly into centuries of royal governance. In Spain, Ritual is not nostalgia, it is constitutional language. The monarchy communicates stability through predictability. Through gestures repeated across generations. Through symbolism that says, the system endures, even as faces change. But the real test begins when tradition collides with modern expectation. This is where the narrative tightens. At the midpoint of this story, the crown moves from rehearsal into trial. Public sentiment shifts faster than protocol can adapt. Social media compresses centuries into seconds. Every image is dissected, every decision amplified. And here, Princess Leonor's role transforms. She is no longer simply preparing. She is representing future resilience. Her composure becomes reassurance. Her restraint becomes signal. This is rarely explained in full context. Spain's monarchy survives because it adapts without appearing reactive. It absorbs pressure quietly. It evolves behind formality. And weddings, especially future ones, are moments when adaptation must appear seamless. Notice the public reaction during royal milestones. Applause, yes, but also silence. Pauses where expectation hangs in the air. Those silences are not empty. They are evaluative. A nation measuring whether the institution still feels anchored. And just when it seems resolved, a deeper question emerges. What happens after the celebration fades? This is where continuity proves itself. Not in spectacle, but in aftermath. In how quickly normalcy returns. In whether the monarchy resumes its steady rhythm without disruption. In whether the crown feels lighter, or heavier, afterward. This moment, subtle as it seems, foreshadows challenges still to come. Because Princess Leonor's future will unfold in a Spain facing economic pressures, political fragmentation, and shifting identity debates. The monarchy's role is not to intervene, but to stabilize. To embody permanence in a landscape defined by change. Here, the climax arrives not in applause, but in trust. This is the moment where ceremony turns into consequence. Where the crown's continuity is either reinforced, or quietly questioned. Not through scandal, but through perception. And perception, in modern governance, is power. The institution survives because it understands something fundamental. Legitimacy today is not commanded. It is maintained, carefully, patiently, through moments exactly like this. So when observers reduce a future wedding to romance, they miss the real narrative. They miss how Spain rehearses stability through ritual. How leadership is tested through restraint. How continuity is made visible without proclamation. And as Spain looks forward, the monarchy's future hangs in delicate balance. What lies ahead may redefine the crown in ways few anticipate. The next chapter will introduce pressures even more complex than today's. Expectations sharper. Scrutiny relentless. Adaptation unavoidable. And in the next episode, the crown faces a challenge unlike any before, one where tradition must prove not just its beauty, but its necessity. Because beyond the wedding, beyond the ceremony, Spain is not watching for joy. It is watching for endurance. Imagine the days that follow, when the ceremonial lights dim and the palace returns to routine. This is the phase most documentaries ignore, yet it is where institutions quietly reveal their strength. Spain's monarchy does not measure success by applause, but by how little turbulence follows a major symbolic moment. And here is the tension few people articulate. Stability is most convincing when nothing dramatic happens. For Princess Leonor, this means that any future wedding is judged not by emotion, but by absorption. Does the institution absorb the moment smoothly? Do public debates settle quickly? Does the crown resume its constitutional rhythm without distraction? These questions are never asked at press conferences, but they dominate internal assessments. Observers often forget how this connects directly to Spain's constitutional framework. The monarchy is designed to be present yet restrained, visible yet neutral. It cannot afford to dominate the national conversation for long. Prolonged attention is not validation, it is risk. This is why preparation matters more than spectacle. Look back at how Princess Leonor has been introduced to Spain. Slowly, deliberately, each stage calibrated. Military formation before personal narrative. Constitutional duty before individuality. This sequence is intentional. It trains the public to associate her milestones not with excitement, but with reassurance. And reassurance, in governance, is currency. Notice how official language surrounding her future avoids excess. No grand promises. No emotional declarations. Instead, continuity, service, responsibility. These are not hollow words. They are stabilizing signals. They tell citizens that the system is intact, that transition is planned, not improvised. But what happens when modern expectations push against this restraint? This is where the monarchy faces its most delicate balancing act. Contemporary audiences crave intimacy. They expect transparency, personality, relatability. Yet the crown survives by limiting precisely those impulses. Too much familiarity erodes authority. Too much distance alienates trust. Princess Leonor stands at the center of this tension. Every appearance becomes a test. Does she feel modern enough to belong to her generation, yet formal enough to preserve institutional gravity? Does she project humanity without undermining hierarchy? These are not questions of image alone. They are questions of survival. And here's the detail insiders watch most closely: consistency. Consistency in tone, in presence, in message. A single deviation can invite speculation about internal uncertainty. That is why protocol appears rigid, because it is protective. It shields the individual by anchoring her to the institution. Few realize how deeply this discipline is learned. From posture to silence, from timing to restraint, Princess Leonor's training is not about perfection. It is about predictability. Predictability allows the public to relax. It signals that the future will resemble the past closely enough to feel safe. Yet beneath the surface, the monarchy's continuity is being quietly tested. Spain today is not Spain of decades past. Trust in institutions fluctuates. Identity debates resurface. Economic pressures sharpen scrutiny. In this environment, symbolic leadership becomes more important, not less. The crown's role is to steady, not to persuade. And that is why the framing of any future wedding matters so profoundly. If it feels excessive, it risks resentment. If it feels cold, it risks detachment. The margin for error is narrow. This is not romance. It is calibration. And just when it seems the framework is secure, another question emerges, one that lingers unspoken. Is the monarchy still necessary? This question never arrives loudly. It seeps in through commentary, satire, indifference. The crown answers it not with arguments, but with presence. With continuity that feels useful rather than ornamental. Princess Leonor's role is central to this answer. She does not argue for the monarchy's relevance. She embodies it. Through discipline. Through restraint. Through an unbroken chain of visible responsibility. Her future milestones are not meant to excite, they are meant to normalize succession. This is where ceremony becomes governance. And this is why, beyond the wedding, the real story continues quietly, in how Spain resumes its rhythm, how the crown remains steady, and how the future queen proves that continuity is not an accident, but a craft. But the next phase introduces pressures even more subtle than public scrutiny. Because subtle pressure is the most dangerous kind. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. It lives in expectations that quietly shift, in questions that are no longer asked directly, but assumed. This is the environment Princess Leonor will inherit, not a crisis of legitimacy, but a climate of constant evaluation. At this stage, the monarchy's test is no longer about acceptance. It is about relevance without noise. Here is the moment where ceremony turns into consequence. When a royal wedding is framed correctly, it reinforces the idea that the institution is alive, functional, and aligned with the nation's long-term stability. When framed poorly, it risks appearing ornamental, a beautiful interruption rather than a reinforcing thread. Spain's monarchy cannot afford interruption. This distinction matters more than it appears. Behind palace walls, planners do not ask how to impress the public. They ask how to avoid disruption. They measure reactions not in cheers, but in how quickly attention moves on. The ideal outcome is not fascination, it is calm. And this is where Princess Leonor's presence becomes decisive. Her demeanor is designed to absorb symbolism without amplifying it. Notice how her expressions remain measured, how gestures are deliberate but unembellished. This is not stiffness. It is signaling. It tells observers that nothing is slipping out of institutional control. Every public moment serves the same purpose: reassurance. Media narratives often search for emotion, for romance, for personal drama. Yet what the crown offers instead is consistency. Headlines may speculate, but official posture never changes. This contrast is intentional. It allows curiosity to exist without allowing it to dominate. But the real test begins when tradition collides with modern expectation. Younger generations engage differently. They are less impressed by lineage, more attentive to authenticity. They question symbols that feel inherited rather than earned. This creates a delicate paradox. The monarchy must remain unchanged enough to feel legitimate, yet flexible enough to feel contemporary. Princess Leonor embodies this paradox. Her education, her public discipline, her restrained visibility, all are designed to demonstrate preparation rather than privilege. The message is subtle but persistent. This role is work. This role is service. This role is burden before benefit. National identity is woven into these rituals, binding past and present in a single moment. Spain's monarchy does not claim authority through power. It claims it through continuity. Through the promise that while governments change, while politics polarize, the institution remains a stabilizing constant. This is why her future wedding is not treated as a culmination, but as a checkpoint. Does the institution still feel anchored? Does the public still recognize the crown as a neutral presence above political friction? Does the transition feel inevitable rather than imposed? These questions are answered not by statements, but by atmosphere. And atmosphere is fragile. A single misstep can transform symbolism into debate. A single overreach can turn tradition into spectacle. That is why restraint is elevated almost to an art form. Silence becomes strategy. Simplicity becomes strength. At this point, every gesture carries the weight of Spain's constitutional future. The climax does not arrive with applause. It arrives with acceptance. When the moment passes and life continues uninterrupted, the monarchy succeeds. When continuity feels natural rather than enforced, legitimacy renews itself. Yet even here, the story does not resolve. Because stability is not permanent. It must be maintained, reasserted, protected against complacency. And this is where the future presses closest. What seems ceremonial now may prove decisive in Spain's future. As Princess Leonor steps further into visibility, expectations will sharpen. Comparisons will emerge. Scrutiny will intensify. The margin for error will narrow even further. Her challenge will not be to inspire devotion, but to preserve trust. And that is a quieter, heavier task. The crown survives not because it dazzles, but because it endures. Because it adapts without advertising adaptation. Because it absorbs change without reflecting anxiety. As Spain looks forward, the monarchy's future hangs not in grand moments, but in sustained balance. And the next chapter reveals pressures even more intense than today's, pressures that cannot be addressed with ceremony alone. Because beyond the wedding, beyond the symbolism, beyond the carefully calibrated gestures, the ultimate question remains unresolved. Can continuity still feel necessary in a world that is constantly redefining itself? That is the story still unfolding. And this is where the silence becomes meaningful. Because after the cameras fade, after the headlines move on, after the public ritual settles into memory, the institution remains, quietly absorbing what has just occurred. This is the phase no broadcast captures. The phase where continuity is either reinforced, or subtly weakened. What matters now is not the event itself, but what it leaves behind. A royal wedding, in this context, functions like a stress test. It reveals whether the crown can pass through intense attention without distortion. Whether symbolism can circulate without inflating expectation. Whether the future feels steady rather than accelerated. Observers forget how this connects directly to Spain's constitutional framework. The monarchy's role is not to lead change, but to survive it. To remain recognizable even as society evolves around it. Stability here does not mean stagnation. It means predictability in an unpredictable world. Princess Leonor stands at the center of that equation. Her role is not to redefine the crown overnight, nor to modernize it through gestures alone. Her role is to ensure that when transformation happens, and it happens slowly, deliberately, without rupture. That is why restraint continues long after ceremony ends. The public may remember the symbolism, but the institution measures something else entirely: the absence of turbulence. The lack of controversy. The way the nation resumes its rhythm without questioning the crown's place within it. Continuity is not abstract here, it is embodied in what does not happen. No crisis, no backlash, no demand for explanation, just acceptance. And yet, beneath the surface, the monarchy's continuity is being quietly tested again and again. Each appearance, each speech, each carefully chosen silence, the margin grows thinner as expectations rise. This moment, subtle as it seems, foreshadows challenges still to come. Because the next phase will not be ceremonial. It will be lived, sustained over years rather than days. Judged not by symbolism, but by consistency under pressure. The crown's future will not hinge on celebration, but on endurance. And as Princess Leonor moves forward, the question Spain will keep asking, even without words, is this. Can stability still feel reassuring when the world demands speed, visibility, and constant reinvention? That answer will not arrive all at once. It will unfold gradually, quietly, in moments most people barely notice. In the next chapter, the pressures grow sharper, the expectations heavier, and the cost of imbalance far greater. Because beyond the wedding, beyond the crown, beyond the ceremony itself, the true test of continuity has only just begun.